Look at it, the sun is shining and we are into February now. And this is the time we start thinking about repotting our bonsai. A lot of these trees have been in these pots for many, many years. And for those of you who are fairly new to bonsai, you will probably have heard about cutting the roots and teasing the roots from time to time. In fact, some people go over the top and they do it irrespective of whether the tree needs it or not. So let me explain to you in detail what repotting is all about, why we need to repot, when we repot, and how to repot. So because I told you we're just into February now, we've crossed January into February, and in the UK and south of the UK, south of England, we have fairly mild weather. The temperature today is 10 degrees and it doesn't feel cold at all. And once you're into February in the south of England, we start thinking about repotting and doing repotting. I used to do it in the middle of February, but don't use it as a deadline. That means February 15th, you've got to start repotting. You've got to play it by ear. If it feels mild and you're having some nice mild weather for a few days, then that's the time to repot. So what do we repot first? I was walking in front of the pines a minute ago, but we don't do those straight away. There are broadly two types of trees, the deciduous trees and the evergreens. Deciduous trees are like your crab apples, Korean hornbeams, European hornbeam, beech, maple. These are the ones we do first. So don't bother about the evergreens. The evergreens we do in mid-March, maybe even early April. So let's concentrate on the deciduous trees first. I'll walk you through some of them. So by deciduous trees, I mean these maples here. Now these trees are what we call our specimen trees. And I do know that this was done 2 years ago, so I don't even need to look at those. Many people talk about frequency of repotting. What you must not do is try and repot every year. There is no need to repot every year. Even the extremely vigorous varieties like Trident maple don't need it every year. Maybe once every 2 or 3 years for very vigorous young trees. But mature trees, some of my Trident maples I've not done for 5 or more years. These mountain maples I do maybe once every 5 years or even longer. Now look at some of our commercial trees. When I say commercial trees, these are the trees that we sell a lot of. And this is the Chinese larch or the golden larch, Larix anabilis. And how do you tell that a tree needs repotting? The best way to find out is to take it out of the pot and see if the roots are going round and round and if the roots are pot bound in the tree. So I pull this out. There are some old roots there, there are some young roots there, and it is sitting like this. So look at all that. This is all last year's roots. And I know that this is a very vigorous variety, so this could do with repotting. So we'll take this in and show you how to do this one. So all these, I think, certainly need to be repotted. Again, if we take out another one, look at it. When you get roots like this, it means that it is due for repotting. You notice that I tipped it up like this because if you tip it up, the water will drain through easily, and then we can start doing it when the soil has drained of all the water. So much for these ones. As we say, we won't look at the evergreens just yet. We will do it a month later or even 6 weeks later. So we are now going to go into our greenhouse where I've already picked out a few deciduous trees, and we will show you how we go about doing those. So these are the deciduous trees that we are going to do today. And these are all Korean hornbeams. They are quite major specimens, although they're not huge. They are specimen trees. Look at the ramification. And we brought them in last night. We tipped them on the side so that the water drains. Can you see how the water has drained? By doing this, the water drains out. So that's the first step you should do. Make sure it is not frozen and also it's not soggy wet. So the next thing we'll show the actual process. But before we get to that, we will show you the tools that we need for repotting. So come along here to our potting bench and I will take you through the tools. These are the tools that we use for ordinary bonsai work, but there are also specific tools for our repotting. So we could do with a pair of gin pliers because you can untwist the wire to undo the wire which is holding the tree to the pot. So that is very essential. You can get the stainless steel or black steel. These are all our own branded Herons tools. And then after that, we have these root cutting scissors or shears. Usually the ones with these big handles like that, they are more useful for cutting the roots. Like this, useful for cutting roots. Although you could double and use this for cutting the twigs as well. But my favorite tool is this sort of design. And they're quite very cheap tools, not sophisticated. What I never do is mix my tools, the ones I use for cutting twigs or branches, I don't use for cutting the roots, and vice versa. The reason being, if you start cutting roots with a particular tool, it gets blunt very easily. So keep the twig cutting tool separate from your root cutting tool. So these are specifically used for cutting roots. The trusty old Felco is very useful cutting, especially thick roots. Thin roots you could never cut with this. These are for cutting fine roots, but thick roots you have to use a branch cutter, maybe a root cutter, or the Felcos. So much for cutting the root. Then the next most important tool are your root hooks. I have used this for the last 50, 60 years. But in recent years, there's a new device which people have brought out, which is like this. It's a single hook rather than a pronged hook. I know a lot of people laugh at me when they see me using this, but all growers all over the world have been using this for donkey's years. So nothing wrong with using this. This may be more sophisticated. Some people like it, but if you like it, I certainly find it very useful. Many bonsai people like to use it now because it's a newfangled thing. This is certainly very handy. You can get a good grip and do it like this. But the handle on these tools, this is single prong, this is a double prong. You can get even a 3-prong. That is very, very useful because the handle gives you a good grip. This, of course, is the standard one for most size trees. But if you're tackling big trees, you need these heavy-duty things. I can show you. What else have I got here? The gin pliers, as I said, for undoing the wire, tying the wire. And then, of course, you have to have, oh, I forgot to mention this. Sometimes you get incurve pots. And this sickle, which is a Japanese tool, is used for going around the inside of the pots to cut the roots which have held onto the outer curve of the pot. And this helps to cut the root out so you can get the root ball out of the pot. So the sickle is a very useful tool, very, very useful tool. So if you can get one of these, it may be useful. If not, you'll have to use a kitchen knife. I have wire here because we have to tie the tree in. I'll talk about wire when we come to actually doing it. And then the mesh for the pots. These are proper black heavy-duty plastic sheets of mesh, which is specifically made for bonsai. In the old days, I will show you, I've been using this since the 60s, 70s, 80s, and 90s. This, believe it or not, I have used for donkey's years. And the main use for this is what we call a fly mesh. Out in the tropics where you get a lot of house flies and mosquitoes, this is used for keeping flies out. And this is most useful as drainage material. So you can improvise and do all sorts of improvisation to suit your circumstances. Also, I will show you these. These are little scoops for scooping soil. In the bonsai world, they've devised these little things, very, very handy, especially you have different sized pots. So these scoops, we call them scoops, they come either in stainless steel, aluminum, plastic, or you can buy little shovels like this to shovel the soil. So anything which comes to hand. If you wanted to use a trowel, you can use a trowel. No harm in doing that. And I noticed that we have some garden tools. This is an ordinary garden tool. I do use it because some very large trees, especially the trees in the field, this ordinary rake for weeding the borders and weeding my trees around the field, I also use for teasing the roots. So no harm in doing that. So as I say, just improvise and use what you can. Another very useful piece of kit, in case you didn't notice, is this cement mixing board. I have used this since the 1970s, and I always used to do my own building work, mixing cement. This is a cement mixing tray. I still remember back about in the early 70s, late 60s, they were sold for like £5 each. I think until a few years ago it was £10 each, so not expensive. But there is a new device which is used specifically for gardening, and it is this tray. It's used for mixing your compost and soil for making cuttings. So you may find this useful. It doesn't spread all the mess all over the place. So these are sort of tools that you will need for doing the bonsai. So we will now come to actually doing the repotting itself. So I have here 5 Korean hornbeams, and we're going to do all of them. So I know that they are pot bound, and I will show that they are pot bound by taking them out of the pot. So let's begin with the first one. You can take the label off. You don't need the label, that's distracting. And we will undo the wire. You notice that most bonsai are now tied into the pot. Very seldom are they not tied in the pot. So they're tied with wire. So we can get rid of the wire to undo the tree. Some people use 1 strand of wire, some people use 2 strands. Usually trunks with a massive girth are better tied with 2 pieces of wire. So we've undone that. So we'll look underneath and see how it's tied. You see, they've used those 4 holes to tie it in. We could easily cut it off, but we're just showing you the length of wire that is used. We can cut it off and pull from the top if it's difficult. Let's see if we can get it through. Better to cut it. Yeah. Maybe cut it. So we cut it and pull it out. You notice that the wire used there looks like a 3mm wire. So for heavy duty trees, those with thick trunks, we usually use something like 2.5, 3.5mm wire. These trees are potted in a very gritty soil. These trees, by the way, come from Korea. And I know they come from Korea because the Koreans are very fond of using this type of soil. So let's look at the roots. That is seriously pot bound. That is what we call a pot bound tree. It's almost like a basket, so dense and heavy. So we will show you how we go about teasing the roots on this. So we take it to the potting area so we don't make a mess. So we're literally stabbing at the root, doing it this way. So we're loosening the soil first. You can improvise and make a wooden stick that has a pointed, sharp blade. Don't forget, bonsai is practiced all over the world, and I dare say in countries like Vietnam, Indonesia, they would devise their own tools. You don't have to use that particular tool. Just because some masters use it, it doesn't follow that you have to use it. Do whatever works for you. The point I'm trying to make is that you use a tool that prises the roots, loosens the roots, but without damaging them too much. You mustn't tear the roots and damage the roots. I know that we're going to cut the extremities off. See, it's like untangling a mass of matted hair. It is literally that. We'll talk about the compost a bit later on. You notice that this root mass doesn't have any thick roots, so they're just fine roots, which is a good sign. The heavy roots on a tree are really just trees that support the tree in nature and help the tree to stand upright. So in bonsai, we don't need the heavy roots. We only need these fine feather roots. Okay, so we got to that stage, we can shake it off. What I never do is bare root the tree completely. I know that some people, especially in Japan, they go so far as to wash every single grain of sand off. I don't think that's a wise thing to do. That's my view. You may disagree with me, but that is my view. I never wash the roots off. I think it is really, really dangerous. So we keep some of the soil near. We can stab in there and let some air in, but I think there is enough air in there now. So the next step is to cut the roots. So we show you what we do, how much root to cut. So it's literally like cutting hair. The extremities of the roots we cut. Some people read in books that you should remove a third of the root, but don't follow it slavishly. The third is only what we call a maximum in my view. Certainly don't take as much as half off. A third is as much as you should stick to. I always use the analogy of the speed limit when you drive. If the speed limit is 30, it doesn't mean you have to do 30. It's only the maximum speed limit for that section of road. So it's like the roots, if 30 is the maximum, you don't have to take 30 off. You can take, 10%, 20%, so on. Now let's test it with the pot. We'll bring the pot back. We test it against the pot to see if it fits the pot comfortably. So we don't have to keep increasing the size of the pot. If you want the tree to grow bigger, then by all means put it in a bigger pot. But since this is virtually a finished tree, we won't bother putting it in a bigger pot. It's reached its height. I think you need a little more, just a little more. Okay, a little more of these long roots. So we remove quite a bit of root there. Yeah, these ones we can take off. For most beginners, taking root off, cutting root, terrifies them because they think it kills the tree. I was explaining once to a very famous television gardener about cutting roots. They said to me, you'll certainly kill the tree, but I have to remind him that when you grow trees in the ground to sell, we grow them in the ground and then we dig them up with a spade or a machine So we're actually cutting roots. So what's the difference? There is no difference. So there you are, the tree is fitting very comfortably in there, lots of room for it to grow. So we'll now proceed to put the mesh and the soil. So this is the mesh here. And for those of you who are very pedantic, you can secure the mesh to the bottom of the pot by doing that. Some people do it. I'm lazy, I never do it, because once the soil is sitting over the mesh, it doesn't get dislodged, but it is a good habit to do. You know, you should do it, but you don't have to do it. Some people never do it. And in fact, some of the commercial trees that come from China, they don't even use mesh. They use a very fibrous type of soil, and they just leave it like that. I've seldom seen mesh used in Chinese trees that I imported from China. So there you go. Different countries use different methods. There is no right, no wrong way as long as it works for them. But mesh is useful because it stops insects, earthworms, and other grubs coming into the pot from underneath. So, and it helps to drain. All bonsai pots, can you just turn the pot, have large drainage holes. You see that one has got its original mesh where it's tied in. These large drainage holes are for draining water when you water the tree. And in that pot, if you turn it upside down, we show the tying holes. You see there are small holes there. These 4 holes are what we call tying holes, for passing the wire through for tying. So that's the purpose of those small holes. Some pots have more holes than that, so that they increase the drainage even more. Okay, so we put another bit of mesh and then we will pass the wire through. We can do as they did before, have 2 pairs of wires, I mean 2 wires, or you can simply use one. There you go. And I prefer to use, like that is 2mm wire, that's perfectly sufficient. Don't use very thick wire. For a tree like this, there's no need to go for 3.5 or very heavy wire. 2 is plenty enough, plenty strong enough. For a large tree like this, 1mm certainly won't do, but this is 2mm wire, this should be okay. Make sure you leave enough wire. Sometimes people are stingy and they find that the wire is not long enough. When they come to tie the tree, you find that you run short. These are all little practical points you need to bear in mind. Okay, so that is the pot prepared. Some people like to sterilize the pot and wash the pot. I don't believe so. The soil has got lots of grubs in it or other creatures in it. So washing the pot doesn't really make much difference unless the tree was diseased. But why should you use a pot like that? Now, when it comes to the soil, I've already spoken about soil on another video, but this is the soil we use. Can you see the granular bits? So this mix of ours has got 30% organic matter, 30% or a third of akadama, and 30 to 40% of volcanic grit, you know, Fuji grit, all sorts of Japanese grits. So it's quite a sophisticated compost. Because this is a specimen or semi-specimen tree, we are using good bonsai compost. If you're just using small 2-year-old, 3-year-old trees that you've just made, you can use ordinary garden compost. You do not need to use bonsai compost for small young trees. Okay, so now we will start putting the tree back. So we will put some soil at the bottom of the pot, cover the layer. And then we also have a little trick where we mount the soil in the middle, because when you squash the tree down, the soil in the middle will spread to the side. If you put it evenly, you may get gaps trapped right in the middle of the tree. So I won't show you the detail. All we're doing is putting soil around, and then we will prod it in. And you can use all sorts of little sticks, bamboo sticks, chopsticks, or whatever. For big trees, I even use a broom handle, believe it or not. It all works. When you're talking of trees in 2 foot and 3 foot long pots, a little chopstick will take you a day. So you got to be practical. So I'll now stop the thing running, because you don't want to have minutes and minutes of prodding with a chopstick. And when the tree is done, we will show it to you again. So here is the Korean hornbeam repotted, and that's the state of the soil. It's a bit dark, but I assure you it's very granular in there. So that will last, I would say, at least 2, if not 3 years in that pot. And some people, if they're putting it in an exhibition or showing it off straight away, they may like to put moss, but you don't have to put moss if you just repotted the tree. It's better to leave them as they are. Moss on these trees grow naturally simply from watering. This is not moss that we put on top of the tree. It has come simply by watering the tree. So there's no need to put moss on top of the trees just yet. If you want to look nice, then you can do it. But see, that's another repotted tree. We haven't bothered to put moss around that. So there's no need to do that. I will now show you how we repot another tree. So let me move over. This is the Chinese larch, which is very pot bound. If Steve can take it out of pot, we'll show you again to remind you how badly congested the roots are. Look at it. You can almost pull it off with your hand. It's gone like a wicker basket, round and round and round. Okay, so we're going to show you how we tease that. So take it straight to the potting bench, and we will tease the roots out. These are what we call commercial trees. Now, a little word about this thing which is called liverwort. Liverwort. I don't know what, is it a moss or not? I don't know how you categorize that. And people say that you get liverwort when you get bad drainage, but I can assure you this is not bad drainage. This is an organic type of soil, and the drainage is extremely good, and yet you get it. So this is where I like to talk about the different types of soil. I'm always amazed how some people show on different types of social media, TikTok and Instagram and Facebook and YouTube, that you've got to use this 100% akadama to pot even little marmee-sized trees. I bet you anything that they don't survive easily, because for the most part, you can't use that as a 100% formula for all types of trees. I always say you've got to use the right type of soil for the right type of tree. For our maples, I certainly don't use 100% akadama. It may work in Japan, but in the temperate countries, especially in the UK, 100% akadama, maybe the fine grade would work for large maples, but certainly for smaller trees, you can't use the large grain akadama and other gritty stuff. So look at it, all the thick roots, we can cut quite a lot off, and from underneath as well, we can cut. Let's get these off first. And in fact, I'm inclined to put it back into this 100% organic soil. These trees, by the way, are imported from China, and they use this soil, and it seems to grow extremely well, both in China and in this country. So I'm not worried. I will put it back in this soil. I can vary the mix and perhaps put like 60% organic, maybe about 30% macadamia, and a tiny bit of volcanic grit. So turn the tree to the side. Let's see underneath what it's like. I think you need to take that off as well. You see there's some mycelium too. That's very tight. See all those thick roots, they do nothing. They will soon grow. Certain trees are very vigorous. Dawn redwood and these larches, they're extremely vigorous. So the message I'm trying to pass on to you is really to take the extremities of the roots off, the thick old roots which are not the feeder roots, so that we encourage fine roots to grow. And stick to no more than 30% of the root, or less if it's needed. See, so some of this still goes around. Okay. Okay, so this time we tie the tree back in and use maybe the same compost, so you can use 100% organic. So I don't need to show you that. And once you repotted the tree, what do you do? Not everyone has a greenhouse like we do here. This greenhouse is protected from the elements, and even when the temperature outside is -6 or -7, it only goes to freezing, or maybe like -2 or -1. So it is protected and it's not exposed to the heavy rains, so it doesn't get waterlogged and sodden with rain. What you mustn't do with newly potted trees is to let the roots rot. And if you let it get too soggy and too wet, then the roots will rot. Just keep it damp. So this is a newly potted tree. Can you see the state of the soil? It's not soggy wet, but it is certainly damp. So this is the state you need to keep the soil in. If you don't have a greenhouse or a polytunnel, I would suggest you put it in a large plastic bag, or you can put it into a garage or shed for the duration of the wet weather and the heavy frost. And when the weather is dry, bring it out and expose it to the elements. On no account should you put it inside the house where the temperature is room temperature of say 10 to 20 degrees, because you'll give it a false sense of spring or summer, and the tree will start to grow again. So it's very important to keep it cool and let the tree grow gradually and let it acclimatize gradually back to its original state. So all these trees here are in different states of having been repotted, and they're being protected here. So that is the aftercare you need for these trees. Some of these trees, like this conifer which I did the other day, Korean spruce, I'm not repotting it because it's an evergreen. I'm going to wait another month till I'm into early March and I will do it then. So deciduous trees first and then the evergreens later on. So all these will be repotted. So once you're into February, that's the time to start repotting your trees. So I hope you've learned something from doing this. For a lot of people, repotting is a very interesting time, but don't feel you've got to do it to each and every tree. If a tree doesn't need it, you don't need to do it. Now, just to reinforce the learning process, I'm going to go out to the display area because I noticed that there are 1 or 2 trees that also need to be repotted. This is a good time when the soil is not frozen to look around. Although this is not a conifer, this is a Hollandii, a box, and I noticed that these are very pot-bound. Look at the roots on that. That is a tree that needs repotting when it's as pot-bound as that. So all these Hollandii are very badly pot-bound, so they need to be done. So that's the way to do it. Go around and inspect the trees, inspect the deciduous trees first, and the broadleaf trees like the pyracantha, although that's not a conifer, it is broadleaf, it is semi-evergreen. Look at them as well. They could be done now too. So we try to concentrate on our maples, hornbeams, hawthorns. This is the time to start doing it from February onwards. February is a very busy month. Once you get into March and you get some hot sunshine, it could be getting a bit late to repot. So March is the time we leave for doing our evergreen conifers, junipers and pines. So I hope you've learned something from this repotting video, and good luck with your trees. Any advice, always ring me, ring the nursery, and we'll be happy to show you what to do. So with that, I will sign off. Hope you've enjoyed this. Bye.